Okay. So I thought that maybe a topic to discuss this week, maybe it might take a couple weeks or so on, is a discussion about Ikvus the Mashiach. About Ikvus the Mashiach, the last generation before Mashiach comes, which is called Ikvus the Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, to discuss the nature of that generation, our generation. What are the specific challenges that face Ikvus the Mashiach, and what are the specific potential. What's the great potential really that's contained within the generation of Ikas of the Mashiach? So to start the topic, I think it's important to deal with a question that I'm sure all of us have asked and have thought about, and maybe the answers that we've gotten over the years have not been that satisfactory, which is the following. If Mashiach didn't come for Rashi, Rambam, for the greatest Rishon, for the greatest Tzaddikim of all time, why in the world would Mashiach come to such a low generation like ours? Again, this is something that songs have written about this question. This is a very very standard basic question that many Jews ask and wonder. It's like, for example, there's a story they say from the Oiv Yisrael, the Abderov, that he one time told his Chassidim that he had a vision of what the last generation before Mashiach would look like, and he said that they are going to be, when he saw the faces of those Jews, he said they're going to be very, very, very low. And he said the word very 10 times. And every time he said the word very, he lowered his hand a little bit more. And by the time the tenth time he said very, his hand was come out on the floor. And after he said that they're going to be very, very low, he had a smile on his face, as if to say that it's somewhat humorous and comical how such a generation will be worthy of seeing Mashiach, and earlier generations that are much, much greater, seemingly, are not able to see Mashiach. So on the one hand, you don't have to go so far. You don't have to come onto prophecies to figure out how low Ikvus Mashiach is. You just have to look outside, and sometimes inside. On the other hand, the Rebbe Rashab of Lubavitch used to say that he has a tradition that Moshe Rabbeinu was shown every generation and its leaders. And when Moshe Rabbeinu saw the last generation of Ikvus Mashiach and its leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu got Chalishas Das. He started feeling bad about himself when he saw the greatness of Ikvus the Mashiach, about how special every little mitzvah that our generation does. It actually made him feel bad about himself. That's how. So there's this contradictory aspect of this generation of Ikvus the Mashiach. On the one hand, it's the lowest. On the other hand, it seems to be one of the highest. So what's going on? Why is it taka that Mashiach will come to such a low generation when he hasn't come to early generations? Things like this. The Mekubalim tell us the following thing. According to the Mekubalim, world history, as far as Avodas Hashem is concerned, as far as serving Hashem is concerned, is divided up into two parts. There's a time period that's called the time of Avodas HaBirurim, of the time of clarification, of Birurim, to be mavar, to clarify, to sift from one part to the other. And then there's a second part, the second era, which is called the Zman of Yichudim, of unification. What does that mean? It means as follows. And the Kabbalah explain, this is something we've mentioned already a number of times. One of the basic principles of Kabbalah is that the main purpose of why Hashem created the world, why Hashem put us in exile specifically, is to go around the world, and each Jew in his own little corner, in his own personal life, to somehow find sparks of holiness. And again, where these sparks came from, that's not for now. But the reality is that Hashem has scattered throughout the universe and throughout each Jewish person some piece of himself, some aspect of godliness. And the job of a Jew in the time period of birurim, of clarification, is to literally sift through all the evil, all the negative forces that are found within himself and within reality, and to somehow find that point of godliness that's contained in his life and in that corner of the universe. That's the time period of Berurim. Now, the amazing thing is, what the Arizal taught is as well, is that Dafka, the greater the spark, the deeper the spark, the more potent and more powerful the spark, Dafka, the lower it's found, and Dafka, the more surrounded it is by the harshest and most difficult levels of impurity that exist. So in other words, the job of every Jew and the job of all generations of Jewish people during this time period of birurim, of clarification, is to go through each level by level by level of impurity and to sift through each and every level to find somehow that spark of holiness that's contained in that specific era, in that specific generation, in that specific time and place. That's the job of the Jewish people. So therefore, based on this, and again, like I said, the greater the spark, the lower it's found. The darker the place it's contained in, and the darker the impurities that surround it. So based on this, the Leshem was the grandfather of Eliashiv, one of the greatest Mekubalim the past few hundred years. He first lived in Lithuania, then he moved to Eretz Yisrael. The Leshem writes the following thing. He says as follows. He says that he asks the following question. He says, if it's true, if the Arizal is right, that every generation, the specific mission of each generation is to sift through and more filth, to find more and more sparks of holiness, and these sparks of holiness we're sort of collectively throwing into our backpack as every generation goes on. So he asks the following question. It says, if that's true and more sparks are being raised and elevated, then why in the world does it seem that the world is getting worse and worse? How is it possible that as the generations go on, we decline, the world morally seems to decline, and things get, impurity seems to be becoming more and more powerful? So the question is, if the Jewish people are doing our job properly, which we seem to be doing over the generations, Hashem still has us, that we're sifting through and clarifying and finding more and more sparks of holiness and raising them up to Hashem, then why is the world getting worse and worse? So says the Leshem the following thing, and this is the key to understand how is it possible that Mashiach will come to the lowest generation of all time. Says the Leshem that even though it seems to us with our eyes that the world is worse, and it seems to us with our eyes that the level of this generation, the souls of this generation, are on a much lower level than what they used to be, than previous generations. Says the Leshem that's a delusion. That's a figment of our imagination. It's like a mirage. Why? Says the Leshem, every single generation, every single moment that we sift through and we clarify some spark and we connect and we break a klipa, so to speak, we break some level of an impurity, some Yetzer Hara, and we find Hashem, we connect to Hashem on that level, then says the Leshem, because this world, this era is the era of sifting through, of berurim, of clarification, then immediately Hashem throws on us a deeper spark to clarify, which is surrounded by an even deeper impurity. And therefore, from our perspective, it feels as if we're getting lower and lower and lower. But in truth, says the Leshem, it's the opposite. We're the job of the Jewish people. We're actually successful at our job, and we're continuing to be successful to sift and to clarify and to raise spark after spark after spark. It's just that as we go from one spark to the next, the impurity that is surrounding the next spark that our job is to clarify is that much more intense. So really, as the generations go on, there's no question that the Jewish people becomes actually more and more strong and more powerful and more holy. The only reason why it doesn't feel that way is because since as the generations go on, the holier we get, the more of a responsibility we have to clarify the deeper and darker places. And therefore, because of that, it feels as if we're descending. It feels as if we're getting lower and lower in our holiness, when in truth, it's not like that at all. The example that's given, for example, I'll give a following mashal. Let's say a person is a bodybuilder and he's lifting weights. So constantly, after every single weight that he lifts, another pound is added on. So if he doesn't know any better, he'd say to himself that he's getting weaker and weaker, because every single time he pumps, it's getting harder and harder, and and he's able to lift it less and less. But in truth, it's the opposite. He's actually getting stronger and stronger. It's just that every single lift of the weights are getting heavier. So therefore, says Leshem, it's the same thing. As generations go on, we're not getting weaker, we're getting stronger. But it's because of our strength that Hashem then puts us in, that Hashem gives us a job of clarifying an even darker place. And therefore, it seems to us as if we're descending, as if the world is getting lower, when in fact, the world is actually getting better. It's just that our job now is to clarify some new spark of holiness which is contained in a very, very dark place. And therefore, this is the mystery of Ikvus of the Mashiach. The paradox of the Ikvus of the Mashiach is that at the same time, we have the neshamas, and we'll talk about this in the future shiurim, hopefully. Where are the neshamas of the last generation coming from? What are we the incarnations of? What generation are we connected to? But what we will see is, as Hashem, is that the last generation, the souls of the last generation are actually the most deep and the most powerful and the most holy. It's dafka because of that. Dafka because as the generations go on, Kedusha is added to the Jewish people because of all the sparks that we're raising. It's dafka because of that we're given the job of sifting through and finding those final sparks which are surrounded by the darkest tumas. So because of that, there is this paradox. It seems as if we can't daven as much. It seems as if we can't learn as much. It seems as if we don't have as much amuna as our ancestors used to have. But all that is because we are being sent by Hashem to clarify the darkest and the most difficult klippas of all time. And the only people that are going to be able to deal with that level of impurity are people that have within them a most unbelievably great neshama. They won't be able to necessarily feel that because of the darkness of the klipa and the impurity that they're having to deal with. But that's the nature of reality. The nature is that as the person gets stronger, as the neshama increases, the more difficult klipa, the more difficult impurity, his job he's sent to clarify and to fix. So last generation, which is the strongest generation of all time, is therefore sent to fix and to deal with the worst impurities of all time. And therefore, when Mashiach comes to last generation, it won't be undeserving. It will be a perfect shidduch. Hashem will reveal when Mashiach comes the inherent strength and greatness of the last generation. It will become clear that it wasn't our weakness. It wasn't our weakness that makes us not be able to daven, and it's not our weakness that makes us not be able to learn and understand as much. It's the opposite. It's the tumma, it's the impurity that we're sent to deal with that makes us feel that way. But deep down inside, we have the strength. We were sent dafka to deal with such impurity because of our inner greatness. So this is just the beginning, just to give a little bit of a taste of why is it, what is the nature of this generation, and the paradox that's contained within it. At the same time, we have unbelievable strength, and at the other hand, we seem not to feel it at all. But this is the point. We have that strength, and it's because of that strength that we're put to deal with unbelievable difficulties. But those difficulties do not in any way undermine the inner strength of the Jew. If anything, it just brings those qualities out, because earlier generations, they would not be able to handle such things. And Hashem gave them sparks to clarify that were surrounded by impurities that they could handle. But our generation, because of the inner strength of our generation, we're able to deal and to clarify those sparks that are surrounded by the greatest impurities of all time. Okay, so if there's any questions, I guess we could open it up for questions.
Hello?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems a little counterintuitive, but
wait,
this kind of encourages
two questions at the same time. Hold on. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes?
No, I was going to say it seems counterintuitive that essentially, we're being encouraged to sink lower, and that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, so that's a very, very big topic, very, very big discussion as far as sinking lower in order to clarify Kedusha. I'll tell you there's no question that is a very, very big avoda. There's a very, very important avoda in the creation of the world and in the process and the evolution of Mashiach is for the Jewish people and the Jewish person to be sent and to descend into low places and to deal with that. Now, this is where many people throughout history have made a very cataclysmic mistake. The cataclysmic mistake that many people have made, and those people include Shavsei Tzvi, Shmo, they include Jesus, they include one of the worst Jews to ever exist, to ever live. The mistake that they make is the following thing, that they go intentionally and they descend intentionally into low places in order with the thought in mind to clarify those places and to uplift those sparks back to God. That is a very, very big mistake. That was the mistake, like I mentioned. That's the mistake of Adam Rishon eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All the great averos, all the great sins of Jewish history, boil down to this point. That despite the fact that it is true, there's without a question, that is true that Hashem, in His unbelievable wisdom, created the world in such a way where every Jew is sent into a dark place in order to somehow bring godliness and to raise godliness up from such a place. But one of the tests of a Jew is to not descend consciously. If Hashem puts you there, and He will, each one on his level, then fine. Then that's the job that you have to do. But as far as you consciously descending into those places on purpose, in order, l'shem shemaim, in order to somehow bring it up back to God, in order to find God there, that's a terrible task and it's a terrible avera. And again, like I said, some of the greatest, even though some of the tzaddikim of all time have failed in that matter. Like I mentioned, Adam Rishon sinning, Nadav and Avihu, all the great averas of all time, the Meraglim, the Chet HaEgel, everything was all around, revolving on this problem of a person descending into evil in order to uplift it. Hashem sends us into evil, then we have to deal with it. Then Hashem gives us the strength to handle it. But if a person descends into those places on purpose, that's a terrible sin, and only bad things come of it. Like I mentioned, Shavsei Tzvi and people like that, false messiahs, that's the main issue with them. Their motivation might have started off holy. They might have started off with an intent in order to descend to low places and to uplift. But it's a terrible, terrible mistake for a person to do that consciously. Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
I was hoping you were going to say we should descend so that, because I remember I went to the Panovich Yeshiva and was very troubled as we looked out on the balcony and you looked out into Tel Aviv and you saw this world of Torah, looking out at this world where it felt like there was an absence of it. But if what you're saying is we can't consciously descend into it, so then how does the Frum community do kiruv?
It's a very good question. It has to be done with seichel. First of all, what's important to remember is that when we're talking about evil, when we're talking about descending into evil, going to another Jew and saying, inviting him for Shabbos, Jews are holy. To call that to descend into evil, that's an extreme. It's an extreme. But there's no question. There is, if a person is being honest with himself, there's no question about it that a person has to know his level. And if a person, I'll give you an example. Let's say a person is for 2 weeks, right? He just heard about God, and now his job is, he's now decided his mission in life is to be Makar of other Jews, which is an unbelievable thing. It's a beautiful thing. But his whole relationship with Hashem began 2 weeks ago. So now what he's going to do is he's going to decide to spend all of his life jumping from club to club to try to be Makarev women his age. Yeah. So it's a person has to have seichel. But there's no question that part of hashgacha, part of the divine providence, how does a person know what evil he's supposed to descend into? So it's part of divine providence. It tells us that. In other words, if we're put in a generation where we're surrounded by, let's say, Jews that are not from, or we're surrounded by people that are asking, that are searching, that really deep down want to have the answers, if we're put into such a generation, then that could be Hashem putting us into evil. You know what I'm saying? So it's not always just a question of, you say in your shul, stay in Beis Medrash, and I'm not going to go outside unless Hashem literally descends with a hand and picks me up and throws me out there. Life has a way of, and Hashem has a way of making the generation recognize what levels of impurity it's supposed to descend into. So if the Jewish consciousness, if the Jewish people feel, for example, 40 years ago, if you ask the average Jew out there, the average frum religious Jew, how important is kiruv? 40 years ago, they'd say, okay, I don't know, it's not for me, it's not for the average person, it's for big tzaddikim or whatever. Ask the average Jew nowadays, they'll tell you kiruv is the most important thing in the world. What changed? What changed there's a lot of things that practically changed, but on a deeper level, what's taking place is that Hashem has sent into the consciousness of the Jewish people that to descend into that level of impurity, to be makar of other Jews, is something that's important and is something that's our responsibility. So in other words, the siman, to know where Hashem is sending a person into evil, isn't just a question of where you physically find yourself. It's also the consciousness and the collective feeling of the generation. So our generation, the feeling of our generation is that it's an important thing to go out and to be Makar. So that already is a telltale sign that that's the divine will of Hashem. A previous generation where it wasn't that wasn't the conscious feeling, then you have to think more heavily about the decision of going out and be Makar. But like I said, nowadays, where it's such a strong feeling that it's a thing to do, then even though, again, the details of each individual case has to be weighed, there's no question, but on a general level, if the Jewish people have decided, and we have decided, that this is something that's an important thing for us collectively to do, that itself is telling. That itself is a way of Hashem telling us that that's something that He wants from us. So again, like I said, how do you know what level to descend into? It's a very difficult thing to know, very, very difficult. Number one is to keep Shulchan Aruch. There's no question that the great mistake of Shabsati, for example, and people like that, was that they descended into evil to such an extent where they were descending into places that are outside of Shulchan Aruch. That there's no question you're not allowed to do. But within Shulchan Aruch, now the question is within Shulchan Aruch, how much, how far, and how so on. It's hard to know. Every person is different. But there's no question that the general collective consciousness of the Jewish people is a telltale sign as well. So if Jewish people right now feel that, say, for example, Kiev is an important thing, and it's not just an important thing, it's a dire matter that we have to all put our energy into, then within the construct of Shulchan Aruch, that's Hashem's way of telling us that's a place that we have to go to. So like I said, it's a complicated issue, but this is a major point, that it is true that the job of every Jew is to descend, but it has to be a mission sent by Hashem. And like I said, it has to be within Shulchan Aruch, obviously, because if it's outside of Shulchan Aruch, there's no way Hashem is sending you to do that. So it's within Shulchan Aruch, and then if Hashem sends you, either physically you find yourself in such a place, or consciously you feel driven to do something like that, then there is such a concept. There is such a concept.
Hey, Yossi, we had a anonymous question.
Yeah.
It reads as follows. I'm not sure I get it entirely, but so will there be a single action or collective actions? It seems that there's a famous time limit belief at 6,000 years Mashiach will come on autopilot, as most learn that way. So
yeah. So that's a good question. Is there going to be one collective push or active tshuva, active Mesiras Nefesh or something? Halavai, it should be. But this opens up another discussion, which is a very important one, which is the process of Mashiach coming. Does Mashiach come in a quick, overnight type of way, or is it something that could theoretically be a very, very slow process? And the answer is that both are possible in truth. It is possible that, overnight, at some moment, there will be this huge awakening, this huge, unbelievable cosmic event that the Jewish people collectively do, and that will usher us, to leave the era of clarification and to enter into the era of unification. That is possible. On the other hand, it could be, and this is what's been happening so far, is that it's a very slow, methodical process. And we descend lower and lower and lower without necessarily feeling it, without realizing it. Every day we descend lower and lower to clarify more places. Ultimately, and at some point, Hashem will say, okay, Ad Kan, this is the gvul, this is the border, this is what had to be done, and it's accomplished. And now Mashiach is here. So how exactly it happens, we should see very, very soon with our own eyes. But all options are really open. It could be in an infinite amount of ways.
Okay, anybody else with a question or? Okay, well, just do me a favor, everybody. Watch your emails, because I'm not sure what we're going to do next week. We have some technical issues. Whether I'll be away, so I'm not sure if we can run it. But we'll figure it out, and I'll let you know by email. Okay.
Also, I just wanted to mention one small thing, is that if there was any misunderstanding, or if it wasn't 100% clear, just you should know this is the beginning of a topic. So you shouldn't think like if you didn't really get exactly what I was talking about, like that's it. Over the next few weeks, these concepts will become more and more clear, hopefully. Okay, so stop with that.
Also, I would just mention that you can feel free to email any questions, either follow-up questions on some of the shurim that we've had, or if you have new topics that you'd like to see discussed. We're welcoming as many topics as we can get. I mean, it may take a while to get to all the topics, but any questions on existing shurim or any follow-up or any new topics, please email them to me, and I'll go through them with Yossi, and we'll figure them out.